So, moving right along, we're jumping into a topic that is absolutely at the core of the work that we do here at the BVA family, and that's about conducting better research. First, we're going to have an interview about a particular case study involving machine learning, and then Emilie's going to moderate a roundtable on some concrete application of AI into research with machine learning. So, we're excited to introduce our next speaker, and first-time Human Advantage participant, Anastasia Buyalskaya, is a behavioral scientist and an assistant professor of marketing at HEC. We met Olivier Sibony earlier today, also from HEC. Anastasia teaches a course on behavioral science. She holds a PhD in social and decision neuroscience from the California Institute of Technology and a master's in economics and business strategy from Imperial College London. Anastasia's research seeks to better understand the drivers underlying decision-making with a focus on the financial domain. Her current research projects include understanding how individuals create and break habits, how consumers signal information about themselves using financial products, and how consumers perceive inflation. Hot topic. Her research uses insights and methodologies from behavioral economics, psychology, and neuroscience. She's published in a number of academic journals, and her research has been covered, where you may have seen it, in CNN, Forbes, and the Harvard Business Review. Thanks for joining us, Anastasia.
Thanks for having me, Ted. Hi, Emily.
Welcome.
Let's get started. The topic of our discussion today, Anastasia, is about habits. Before we even get started, I think I told you in the green room, I'm an old journalist, so I get quite particular about the words that we use, and habits we find when we're talking with clients is something that they throw around all the time. Habits, habits, habits. But not everything is a habit. In your words, what do we mean when we say habits? How would you define that?
So I would say that we were quite particular about that definition as well. So we define habit as having three characteristics. The first is the behavior needs to be automatic. It needs to be executed almost reflexively without a lot of conscious thought. The second is that it needs to be cued by context. So something in the environment is actually triggering you to execute that behavior. So for example, we typically don't think of toothbrushing as something that's the output of a utility maximization problem, right? We don't go into the bathroom and think, what are the pros and cons of brushing my teeth? We go in there, there's something about, 6 a.m., I'm in that physical space. There's other cues in the environment that start that behavior of toothbrushing. So that's the second piece, which is really important. And the third, and this is quite unique, this really comes from neuroscience, is what's called insensitivity to changes in reward. So to give you an example, so Colin Kemmer, who's an author on this paper, is a brilliant interdisciplinary researcher, and he really pushed us to look at not just psychology, not just behavioral economics, but also neuroscience. What can neuroscientists tell us about the brain? And it turns out when you're in this habit mode, you become less sensitive to changes in the reward. So if we stick with the toothbrushing example, Halloween is around the corner, and a very popular trick that children do to their parents, they'll swap out the toothpaste with mayonnaise or something horrible. And if you're brushing your teeth for the first time, you'll notice that right away, right? You're never even going to start brushing your teeth. But most of us, we don't really pay attention, right? We put the toothpaste on, we're sort of brushing, and you might even spend like 5 seconds brushing your teeth before you realize, oh, that's mayonnaise. And so what that means is you become less sensitive to the reward value of that behavior, right? The reward value is now negative, and you still are executing it. Yep. So when we think about a lot of social media habits or other things we think of are sort of bad habits, maybe the reward value is low, but our behavior is not sensitive to that.
Okay. So it's kind of automatic, reflexive, it's cued by some sort of context, and we have some insensitivity until until we feel the stimuli change or we feel the context change. Okay, great. So tell us about this research that you conducted. Which populations were you studying? What sort of habits were you trying to build, or what were they trying to build that you wanted to observe?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned there's a number of co-authors on this research. This was published last year in PNAS. And thanks to two co-authors, Katie Milkman and Angela Duckworth, who run something called the Behavior Change for Good Center at the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania, we were able to partner with two institutions. The first was 24-Hour Fitness, so a very large North American gym company. They shared with us data on about 60,000 gym goers spanning over 10 years. We had something like 12 million data points, so talk about big data, right? The second was a hand hygiene company. So actually more specifically, it was an RFID technology company. So they create badges for monitoring hand hygiene in hospitals. So completely different behavior. And they shared with us a data set on over 30 different hospitals, again, thousands of hospital workers, and sort of the frequency with which they wash their hands. We had something like 40 million data points there, excuse me. So we were looking at two very different populations, trying to build two very different habits. One was an exercise habit, something that many of us try to build, and the other was a hand washing habit. So those are the two.
Okay.
I'm curious, you talked about big data and obviously you had a lot of data points. Can you tell us a little bit more specifically about how you used machine learning in that experiment?
Yes, absolutely. So the application of machine learning, which I will say was really led by Hung Ho at the University of Chicago on this project, what we did, we had the benefit of having plenty of data at the individual level. So we actually fit our model. We used something called a lasso model, least absolute shrinkage and selection operator, I think is what it stands for, at the individual level. So we took data from, let's say, one gym goer who'd been going to the gym for 4 years. We had thousands of data points on that gym goer. And we trained a model to look at all of the data we had on that gym goer to predict, would they go to the gym, sort of yes or no. It was a Logit model. And what will be predictive of that? So let's say, I don't know if it's the time of day or day of the week or something else. I just feed a bunch of variables into the model without a hypothesis. And then the lasso model does the hard work for me of basically saying, out of all of these variables you gave me, the vast majority are going to be 0, has no predictive power, but here are the 3 that are predictive of this individual, for example. So we did that for each individual. And we also calculated the AUC, which is sort of a measure of predictability overall. So how predictable in general was their behavior? So a 0.5 means it's a coin toss. It's not predictable at all. 1 means it's super predictable, right? 100% confidence. Most people are somewhere in between. I think our average was around 0.75, 0.8. So some predictability, but not perfect predictability. And we could look at when that predictability plateaus. So how long does it take for someone to really form a habit?
Okay.
Can I play devil's advocate for a moment? Why integrate machine learning for this particular experiment? Or maybe a better question would be, what do you feel machine learning provided that human researchers, perhaps using more traditional data analysis or more observational methods, couldn't do or may have missed?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think here we need some context of the history of habit research. And you've had Wendy Wood, who's
Katie's been here, yeah.
Katie, we've had Katie. So a lot of the historical research on habit used longitudinal survey data. So for example, if I wanted to know how long, Ted, it took you to form a habit of going to the gym, I would send you a survey every morning saying, hey, Ted, did you go to the gym? Yes or no? By the way, what time was it? Asking you about some variable, some context cues. And how automatic did it feel, by the way? And so I'd be looking over time. When you tell me actually that's quite automatic, I would learn something there. Now, it's a great method. There's a couple of limitations. The first is sample size. So we had 60,000 people in our gym data set. You can't do that type of method, or at least it's incredibly costly to do that type of survey method with 60,000 people. So by using more of an empirical method, more of a data science-driven approach, we could look at a much bigger data set. Okay, so we want to be sure that we're saying something about human behavior writ large, not kind of a small sample of 100, 200 people. That's the first thing. The second thing is something called recall bias, which is incredibly important if you study habits. So recall bias says that it's possible that when I brush my teeth, I actually don't remember what cued that behavior. I don't remember what time it was or what it is I saw. And a lot of our habitual behavior, we don't have great memory for. No. And so what we can do with machine learning is I don't need to ask you and I don't need to rely on your memory. I just feed the model a bunch of data about you and your context, and the model will do that hard work for me of figuring out what was most predictable.
Does it also eliminate some kind of priming effects that if I go 4 days and have to message you through some sort of research platform that I haven't gone to the gym, it starts making me feel guilty, and I think they're going to ask me again tomorrow. My gosh, I should go to the gym.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know what I mean. If we can use machine learning to then also make willing participants a little bit less conscious of their being observed.
Yeah, I mean it's all possible, right? Nobody in our data set. It was all, of course, de-identified. We had no idea who these people were. They had no idea that we were looking at their data. So any of these sort of potential experimenter demand effects or any sense that somebody's watching me and I better behave in a certain way, that's really removed, I think, from this experimental setting, empirical setting.
So what about the findings, the outcome? I'm curious.
Yeah, good question. So there are a couple of big findings. The first is, so what actually predicts habitual execution? What are those context variables? And we find that, of course, some of them are individual specific. So maybe there's certain things that will be predictive of you going to the gym, but not me. But there are also things that are universal predictors. And to give you an example, universal predictor of gym going is day of week streak. So what that means, a streak is, you do something a couple times in a row. Day of week streak is you go on a Monday, you go next Monday, and after a while, it's highly predictable that you go on Mondays. And, it sounds intuitive, but it was a huge 70%, I think, of the individuals in our data set, it was a positive predictor for them. So there are a couple of these sort of universal predictors that are interesting to understand. The other big finding, and I think this shocked people a bit more, when I ask my students, how long does it take to form a habit? They'll say something like 21 days, and they'll have a lot of confidence in that answer. And it turns out that doesn't really come from any scientific research. And we were quite curious, this was really the first paper that used observational field data to try and answer that question. Actually, how long does it take to form a habit? And what we found is it depends. So the time estimate was quite different for the two behaviors. So for hand washing, it took an order of days. After about 10 days, most people in our data set had highly predictable hand washing behavior. For gym attendance, do you want to guess?
Yeah, I just joined a gym, so I think I'm going to be depressed. I was going with the 21 days, but I guess...
It's a bit longer than 21 days.
Okay,
4 or 5 weeks?
So it's not on the order of days, and it's not on the order of weeks. It's on the order of months.
Oh.
There's no help for me.
So you say there's no help for me, but when we talk about this research, I presented it in my class last week, and there were some signs of relief. I've been going for 2 months, but that's okay because it takes a couple months actually. So, I think that's an important finding. A lot of us, I think, are frustrated with ourselves for not being able to build habits very quickly, right? Certainly in 21 days, if that's the benchmark we have in our mind. And what we find is it's going to depend. It's probably going to depend massively on the behavior, and we have some theories around why it might depend.
Well, I want to dig in there. What is that difference? Is hand washing because it's completely within my control? It's very low cost. I can do it in multiple contexts. Whereas going to the gym means get my shoes on, maybe get on public transport or car. Is it just contextual drivers that make it different, or is there something about the habit itself that takes a different duration?
Yeah, so the short answer, I guess, is we don't know. We don't know the answer to why one is so much shorter, the other is longer. We have some hypotheses, and I hope that our team or another team of researchers will help us answer that question. One of the hypotheses is around complexity of behavior. So hand washing, it's a relatively simple motor behavior. To be clear, it still requires learning.
Sure.
So my toddler is learning how to wash their hands. I still have to stand there next to him and kind of show him along. But he's going to develop that behavior pretty fast, and he's not going to develop a gym-going behavior anytime soon, right? So there's something about the complexity of behavior. To your point, you got to get your shoes on, plan it, etc. That might explain this difference, but there might be other things. To your point, so there's a number of hypotheses.
Yeah, I was also wondering, just thinking about the gym thing. Is there a difference in terms of like new habits and past habits? So let's say I used to go to the gym and then I stopped for a few years. It's probably not going to take me as long to rebuild that habit that Ted, who's never been to the gym, right?
Excuse me?
Yes.
Maybe I should reverse it.
That's a great point, and that's another thing that might explain why we see habit formation so fast in the hand washing context, because these are adults working in a hospital. These are not children learning to wash their hands for the first time. So it might be new in this context, but to your point, they're probably repurposing a lot of the same, neural machinery to execute that behavior in this new context.
I'm thinking, you met our colleague Richard Bordenave earlier. He and I talk about habits a lot, and did you learn anything? One of the things we're focused on is kind of these intrinsic or extrinsic rewards from these habits. Any learnings from your study in terms of the rewards? Because I can see the rewards for the gym maybe being a bit more, possibly more intrinsic and more extrinsic than hand washing is kind of.
Right. Or
It's important.
Health
I don't know.
rewards.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we actually looked at rewards in the context of that third attribute I mentioned. So I said behavior needs to be automatic, cued by the context, and also insensitive to reward. So actually you would expect to see more habitual behavior, less sensitive to any changes in reward. And what we were able to do is In the gym context, there was a set of interventions that were actually run by Katie and a larger team of researchers that were intended to increase gym attendance. So there were all sorts of interventions like, I'll give you $20 if you go 4 times next month, etc. So they changed the reward value of going to the gym. So now you had, the physical benefit of going to the gym plus $20. And what we find is that people that have not yet formed a habit respond more to those interventions.
Okay.
Exactly as we would predict.
Yeah.
And the people that were much more predictable, their behavior changed much less. And that might actually explain why a lot of nudges don't work, right?
Yeah.
Because depending on the behavior that they're targeting, maybe the behavior is highly habitual. And so you wouldn't
quite good
expect...
enough already.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
quite good enough. And so you wouldn't expect people to change too much.
Mm-hmm. That was one of the questions that came in from the audience. Says, okay, the model was built, but how was it used to change behaviors for new users? So you talked about with the gym. What about in the healthcare setting for people to wash their hands? Any interventions that followed up your study?
Yes, so in the healthcare setting, what we find is highly predictable. So one of these universal context cues was the physical space. So in the hospital, they run around to lots of different rooms, right? They're hugely under time pressure. And we find that certain rooms lead to much more predictable hand washing. Now, I wish I knew more about those rooms. Is it that there's a huge poster of, hand washing right in front of the sink in that room? Is it that there's certain types of cases that go to that room? Maybe kids are in that room, and so you're just much more sensitive. I don't know the answer to that, but it seems like the physical environment was incredibly important for the hand washing.
That reminds me of a nudge. Wasn't it like that? I don't know if we tested it at BVA Nudge Consulting or with someone else, but there was a nudge that was used to push people to wash their hands in hospitals, and it was this lemon scent that they had, and that was basically helping. And I don't remember the number, but it went like way up.
Yeah, kind of contextual, kind of sensorial.
So it's interesting that you're saying that. Just reminded me of that.
The other thing, just if I can add one thing, Ted, on the research. So there's not a lot known as well about attributes of people that lead them to be more habitual or less habitual. Is that one of the questions? And so we connected, again, in this gym setting, it was de-identified, but we knew things like gender and age or age range, I think, and we knew zip code. So we could tell you, this person lives in a city or more rural. We could look at attributes, so like the income of that general area, right? So we could infer certain things about that individual, that family. And so what we find is that, and this might not be too surprising, younger people that are more likely to live in urban areas are much less habitual, much less predictable behavior. So they might go, Sunday night to the gym, then Tuesday morning, then they don't go for 2 weeks, then Wednesday, it's like their predictability score is really low. Like it really is kind of a coin flip. Older people, more likely to live in rural areas, more likely to have kids, much more predictable, right? So every Monday morning I go, or whatever it is. So as someone that's part of the latter, that makes a lot of sense to me. My behavior is very routinized, but I don't think anyone had documented that before in field data, so that's something we were...
So that kind of addresses demographic differences. One of the questions that we got here says, let me find it again. I wish, and you may share this wish, I wish a data set of this size would have included information about the neurodivergence of the participants. Habits may not work the same way for everyone who's neurotypical. Probably a gym doesn't have information on the neuro, but as a neuroscientist, do you think we may build data sets that can incorporate that, and do you think that would have an impact on habit formation?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And I think, we started this research in 2018. And I mention that because, of course, at the time people were working on, big data and people were using machine learning models. But the speed of innovation that we've seen in this space over the past 5 years is enormous. And the quality of data that we have on people. So in our data set, we didn't have any data on, from mobile phones or apps, right? The quality of data you have from those sort of sources probably get at things like neurodivergence, or at least certain preferences, right? Are you more introverted, extroverted? Are you? And so, yes, absolutely. I think if we were to do this research today, the data set would be much bigger, and hopefully we could start to think about some of those attributes.
Actually, I have a question that's kind of tied to that. Most of those models do improve with time. If you were to rerun this experiment today, do you think the findings would be different, and how?
Oof, yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if they would be that different. I think what might change is, so as I said, we use this model called Lasso, which is, I think, a relatively straightforward, it's been around for quite a long time. I think today, the models have advanced so much that we could probably have better predictability with the new machine learning models. So maybe the difference is that we would choose a different model. But I would say that the trade-off that we had to make, and a trade-off that a lot of researchers have to make today, is between predictability and interpretability, right? So at the end of the day, we actually still identify as behavioral scientists. We use machine learning as a tool, but it's part of a bigger toolbox to say something about human behavior. And so we can't use a black box in our process. We need to be able to interpret the results of our analysis. And Lasso allowed us to do that because even though you can't put too much weight on the size of the coefficients, you can say something about the context, you can say something about the individual level, the group level, et cetera. And so that's sort of a trade-off that you'd have to make. But I do think the difference is that we would try a lot more models today.
Do you have any plans to do so?
Oof. Well, it took 5 years to finish this project. So
a little break and then you
yeah, so maybe I think right now some of us are really interested in this question of why this difference between different behaviors. And so the research has moved on to answer some of the follow-up questions from this work. But the wonderful thing now, and science has really moved this way, is the data is available online, the code is available online, and we encourage researchers to go and replicate this work or even try better models, right? Try different models on this data set. And I think that's great, this approach to open data, open science.
Right, yeah.
It's a much better approach, in my opinion.
Another question that's come in from those who are watching online. Have you tried to use synthetic data to feed the model? And if so, what was the result? Or were your data sets big enough that you didn't require?
Yes, we tried a couple of robustness checks with synthetic data to make sure that things like predictability, it wasn't mechanical. So we did do that as a robustness check. I should also mention, for people that are in the weeds on machine learning, this was a supervised machine learning. So we trained the data set first. We had training data and about 5, 6, this is kind of standard called 6-fold cross-validation. We trained it on the majority of the data, and then we tested it on the out-of-sample data. So we did follow, sort of standard machine learning techniques, and there is a robustness check.
We've got a lot of questions coming in. Sorry.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Somebody asked, why did you choose the gym as an example? It seems like one of those activities where people pay for a membership but don't actually go, this intention to action gap. What about focusing on eating habits or others? For instance, if you see food sitting out in the kitchen, you're more likely to eat it. Was it just access to gym data, or were you after something specific with a fitness behavior?
So I think if you ask people what are sort of the top habits that you want to build, exercise is probably in the top 3 for most people, right? So I ask this question of my students, and exercise is typically, if not number 1, it's certainly in the top 3. So we were very interested in exercise, and we wanted to get a second behavior that was very different. So hand washing felt like, again, the complexity was very different, the setting was very different, because we didn't want to say something about going to the gym. We wanted to say something about building habits, okay? And so we chose 2 very different domains. We would have loved to have 20 data sets from 20 different partners, and absolutely, I think eating is very interesting, but these are the 2 that we started with.
Yeah. Are there any behavioral levers that exist in the literature that to accelerate habit formation and maybe reduce the time that it takes? So say it takes months to get Emilie and I into the gym at a regular basis. Any pointers, any heuristics, any levers that you think can be applied?
Well, I don't know if I'm the best person to give advice. I think people like Wendy Wood and Katie Milkman have great research on this. Research on fresh start effect, sort of habit stacking, temptation bundling, etc. I think that for me personally, now when I build habits, I'm much more sensitive to context.
Okay.
So that was for me the really big learning of this research is context is incredibly important. I think a lot of us, when we pass by a bakery and then kind of double back to go in and get a treat, we think, well, that was some utility maximization, like the benefit of getting that treat outweighs the cost. And having done this research, I think I'm more sensitive to the fact that it's actually the window front, and those beautiful pastries and the waft of the smell, right? It's completely context, and it's very much not my prefrontal cortex making that decision. And so if I want to, for example, break that habit, then I have to change the context. I change the route that I go under, right? Rather than relying on willpower, because it's not a utility maximization problem. And similarly, I think if you want to build a new habit, build it more quickly, knowing what those context cues might be may help supercharge it, right? If I know that every single Monday that might be likely to get me into habit quicker, maybe that would help.
Okay. Another question on habit formation. What role does technology play? This person says, for instance, my Apple Watch reminds me to wash my hands. Also in terms of a gym, kind of a separate question here, but in the same line. Also in terms of the gym, doesn't being part of a club or a group have an influence here? If you're in a club, you're required to go on certain days or you get that social pressure. Two kind of related questions there. Tech and social dynamics.
Yeah, well, first of all, I have a lot of questions about why the Apple Watch needs to remind that person to wash their hands, but I've never heard of that. That's great. So the social context, yes, absolutely. And one of the contextual cues that we think a lot about is social cues, right? So if you go to the gym with a gym buddy, then it's not just you're letting yourself down if you don't go to the gym, but you're also letting down your buddy. So absolutely, I think there's a lot of social influence. And then again, in terms of building habits, how do you think about holding yourself accountable? Well, if your best friend is going to go, you're less likely to kind of quit.
Does gamification increase the speed of habit forming? Any evidence on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually have some research right now trying to answer that question. I'm looking at that question in the financial domain.
Okay.
So there's been a lot of interest and concern around the use of gamification in things like investment apps. I mean, we see gamification everywhere. But in the context of exactly trading and investing, and there's good research to show that it leads people to take more risk. And so we're trying to figure out, does it get you into habit mode? Because we know that habit mode, again, you're less sensitive to this reward changes, right? So if I'm in habit mode and I'm losing money, what it would say is that maybe I'm not as sensitive to the fact that I'm losing money, right? And do we want that or not? So we're actually running some experiments to answer that question. So next year when I'm back, I'll tell you.
All right, sounds good. This one might be difficult. I don't know if you're an expert in addiction, but since we've just been talking about, in a way, almost gaming and gambling with finances, do these approaches maybe work on addictions and not just habits? I'm not sure that habits and addictions are formed in exactly the same way. But as a neuroscientist, any point of view? Yeah,
so this is a discussion actually we had at length with Colin Camera, who's one of the co-authors on this paper, who's at Caltech, and there are people at Caltech that study addiction, and there's different views on this. There's certainly things that overlap between people that have highly habitual behavior and maybe are more prone to addiction, but sort of the neural pathways of addiction are different as well. So I don't know that I'm the expert to talk about that. My guess, though, is if you were interested in understanding addiction and you had a lot of data on people, that you could try a similar method to see if behaviors are very predictable.
I want to take us from this particular experiment to where I think at BVA we think of more of your work being around financial behaviors. What about financial habits? If Emilie wants to contribute more to her pension, if I want to save up for a down payment for a very overpriced apartment in London with my partner, if people want to put money aside for your little boy's education, anything that and it could be a hypothesis, Anastasia, but any hypotheses you're getting around habit formation that could apply to the financial domain where you spent so much of your time thinking and working.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is in the realm of hypotheses, but again, this is active research, so I hope to have a more final answer. I actually think it's harder today in some ways to build financial habits. And I'll give you an example. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you were trying to teach your child to save regularly, they would have a piggy bank. And you would come home and you would put all the coins in that piggy bank. What's beautiful about that? You have the context cue of the physical piggy bank. You come home, you see it right there. On your dresser, every single day. You come home at the same time, right? You take out the change, you put it in the piggy bank. That's perfect for habit formation. Today, so much of finance has become invisible, right? So who has change anymore? Maybe kids do, right? But less and less so. And there's research on this, is sort of the pain of paying has gone away, right? Because we don't pay, we're not aware of how much we're spending anymore. We just click a thing, now we click our phones. And so I actually think it's harder to form financial habits. And we're going to do some research around, is it possible to bring some of those piggyback-like cues back into the environment to help people form things like saving habits, investing habits from relatively early age?
Because not only do you have the contextual cue of, entering your childhood bedroom and seeing the piggy bank, but you have these kind of sensorial cues. The piggy bank, the money makes a noise when it hits, the piggy bank gets heavier. After a month, your mom says, well, Anastasia, pour it out. See if you have enough to buy that video game, to buy that sweater, whatever. Yeah. If the pain of paying has gone away, has then the pain of saving and investing gone away, or is it actually the inverse?
Well, I think certainly the pain of investing is less today than it was in the past. So it used to be quite a pain to set up an account at Charles Schwab, figure out how to transfer money here, kind of figure out how many shares to buy. There were transaction costs. A lot of those things have gone away. Now it takes seconds to set up an account on Robinhood. There's basically no transaction costs with most broker-dealers that you work with. You can kind of do it, on the metro, right? Trade here and there. So I think friction is much lower. Again, I don't know if that's leading to better investment decisions or not. It's certainly leading to more. We see a lot more of the population is investing, and that overall seems like a good thing. We want more people invested in the market, but we don't want them losing money at greater rates than other people. So I think it's an open question, and I'm positive in the next 5 to 10 years we'll have good research to answer that question.
I'm working with a couple of financial institutions, and what I'm also learning is that the way people think about investing is different than saving. The financial institution might see them as kind of the same thing, or an escalation of let's get Emilie to save, then we're going to get her to invest a little bit. Any thoughts on that difference of how people's cognition or how their processing of saving versus investing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think this is really a framing question, and I think people are reluctant to save. To your point, it doesn't sound particularly sexy, particularly when interest rates are relatively high. It doesn't feel like you should be sitting too much in cash. At the same time, investing, depending on who you're talking to, I have a friend who said, "Oh, my father never invested. He said it was speculation. It was just a dirty word, investing. It was a dirty word in the house." And so I think it requires some level of knowledge, right? There are bad ways to invest, certainly. But getting people comfortable with investing, I think, is sort of the first step, is really important. And then I do think there's a lot of benefit to reducing friction. So I was kind of critical about Robinhood removing some friction, but I think overall, the easier you make it for people, and I know easy comes up a lot at this conference, the more likely people will at least try it, right? They're not going to put all their money in it, but they'll put €100 just to try, just to play with it. And that, by the way, helps people learn. And then over time, people feel maybe more comfortable doing this crazy thing called investing.
I think you're so right in that way of framing of investing. So I'm American, as you can tell, and I think this idea of investing is kind of instilled in us as a cultural context, right? It's what you do. Even your grandparents might give you, a stock or a share or a savings bond. I'm aging myself there, right? But whereas I've been doing some work in other markets like Ireland and Italy where investing is risky, we hear people say, I'm not the Wolf of Wall Street, that's speculation, that's crazy, that's so much risk. And saving is a behavior that there is easier for them. So I think it's so interesting too to see how, you talk about these contextual cues, there can be kind of a cultural contextual driver that makes you say investment bad, savings good, in maybe the Irish context, or in the American context, it's like, what are you doing leaving money in your savings account? Invest it, see it grow, and the person could be demographically the same apart from which passport they carry, and that makes them feel so differently about the framing of investing and saving. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, making it accessible to people, you had someone earlier in the conference talking about, demographic biases in some of these industries. And investing, I just remember when I was younger seeing advertisements for investing, and it was always sort of an older man, right? It was like, oh, I guess this is what older men do, right? And the other day I was in the metro and I saw an advertisement, I think it's a fintech, with the Williams sisters, right? Serena and Venus Williams. I thought, that's fabulous. Like, why do we have to wait so long to see that everyone invest, right?
And they have some money to invest.
And they've got some money, by the way. They've got some money to invest. So So I think that's fabulous, right? It's making it accessible. Just like, finance, all of us should be investing, even with small amounts, right? If we don't have Williams sisters' money, we should still be investing a little bit. And I do think that's part of it, and we're starting to see that now.
Two very different questions have just come in. I'm going to start with because we're on the topic of kind of banking and finance. One is asking about roundups. For example, when you pay €2.75 with a card, it might round up to €3, and the difference is transferred to your savings account. It offers kind of a modern alternative to transitional spare change saving methods. Any insights about that? Any opinions about that?
Yeah, I think those are great tools. By the way, some of those tools, and I think Acorns, there's a couple of fintechs that do this. They were very much founded with principles of behavioral science.
Right?
So
it was the core of their build.
Yeah, it was very much, people have trouble saving, and why don't we make it really easy? We make the amounts so tiny that they're actually happy to do it, because 275, that's kind of a hard number to keep in your head. 3 is a very simple number. So we round it up for them. We actually make it easier to even process those numbers. And then almost invisibly, they start saving money. So I think that's a brilliant tool. There's a lot of these default examples. Of course, one of the most famous ones from Richard Thaler around opt-in versus opt-out retirement saving, where you start a new job and the 401k before, instead of asking you, do you want to opt in, it automatically enrolls you into saving. And there's a lot of opportunities for these defaults to help us save more, and to your point, actually transfer those savings into investments.
Right. This one's maybe a little technical. We're going back now to your machine learning study. Can you explain how the machine learning model works? Maybe in layman's terms. Yeah? Yeah,
absolutely. So the Lasso model, so it's LASSO, is, I would kind of say it's like an OLS model on steroids. So an OLS regression is sort of the first thing we learn when we're learning statistics, right? And the difference would be, in OLS regression, you need to have a hypothesis for the different variables whose coefficients you're trying to estimate. So for example, I would have to have a hypothesis that day of the week is going to be predictive, and then I put the 7 days of the week, and it's going to give me some coefficient on each of those days, and maybe Sunday's not predictive, but Monday's highly predictive. Now, what we decided is we actually don't really have a hypothesis. There's 60,000 people in our sample. We don't know them. We don't have a strong reason to believe that some small group of context cues are going to be predictive for all of these people, right? So we put in what's called a very wide data set. So, dozens and dozens of context cues without a hypothesis. And what the Lasso can do is it can basically decide the ones where the coefficient is very small, it automatically zeroes it out. That's in the name. And so most of these things go to 0, and then only the things that are predictive remain sort of positive or negative and significant. And so we applied this Lasso model to data on each individual. So again, this was thousands of data points, so we had a lot of data. So typically you can't really apply models at the individual level, you apply it on the aggregate. We applied it at the individual level. So we fit the model, as I said, to about 5/6 of the data set. That was our training data, and then we tested it on this out of sample data to get both the predictors as well as the predictability score.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Em, I'm seeing the time tick down. As our Chief Innovation Officer, and as working so much with AI, anything you want to say about, anything you want to ask Anastasia in terms of the engines, the models, about them improving? What would you expect with this next study? You said it would change over time, but as we're working with AI, as you're working with AI, any kind of skills? A similar question that I asked to John List. Any skills that you think researchers in the academic realm, or in the more kind of, we work in public and private sector, but tools that researchers need to be able to manage machine learning, to integrate AI into their work?
Yeah, so I really liked Olivier Siboni's presentation this morning talking about decision aids. And I think that's the right way to think about these machine learning tools. It seems quite intimidating at first. I'm not a machine learning researcher. I'm not a machine learning expert, and so I can't possibly, play in this new space, play with this new technology. And actually, as I said, we all really identify as behavioral scientists, but we thought that this was a great tool to better understand what we're really interested in, which was habits. And so I think the big piece of advice is, first of all, not to be scared, to start small. Again, this Lasso model is is quite interpretable. So I think it's a good place to start if you already know OLS regression, how those things work. Use tools out there. I use ChatGPT, like if I have questions, right? With all the good things that Siboni talked about, questioning it and so forth, critical thinking. But there's a lot of tools out there that can help you learn how to use them, learn how they differentiate maybe from the tools that you're currently using, and again, use them more as an aid. So they're not going to completely replace, they're not going to completely automate your job or whatever it is you're doing, but maybe they have something to add, or maybe they allow you to work with, for example, a bigger data set, as it did for us. And I think there's a lot of benefit to that.
What would be, Anastasia, if you had, you could choose the next habit you wanted to study or that you wanted to build, what would you set your sights on if you had access to the data? I know not all the data is accessible.
Right now, I've been thinking a lot about financial habits, definitely. So this is where broker-dealers have tons of data on this, of course. So I think financial habits are really important for us to better understand as a society. And this is a funny one because, again, when I ask my students, which habits do you want to build, nobody talks about financial habits at all.
No,
Everyone
not
talks
save
about...
more or
No, not at all. It's all healthy eating, exercise, and at the end of the day, we also need some good financial hygiene, right? Good financial habits. So I think this is one where there's a lot of green space in terms of research. And I'm sure, to your second question of what would I like to build, I'm sure I can be better as well in terms of saving habits and investment habits. So there's a self-interested reason to study them too.
Do you, when you poll your students and they all talk about fitness and eating healthier and being healthier and going to the gym more, do you think that's also a framing issue, that we don't think about financial behaviors as habits?
I think so. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, a lot of financial behavior is invisible until it's not, right? Until you're bankrupt or incredibly wealthy and it's very visible. So versus going to the gym, sort of looking good, eating healthy, that's incredibly visible. Yeah. And I think especially students, MBA students, they're there to build a network, make the next step in their career. They think a lot about how do I signal important information about ourselves. And your employer might not know how much you have in your savings account or how good you are at saving, but they'll certainly know if you're kind of awake and seem to have good health. So I think there are some reframing issues there too.
Great.
Yeah.
I know we're running out of time. Thank you so much, Anastasia. This was really interesting.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
For our first time. We're going to stay on the topic of research, but we're going to pause for a second. I'm going to go visit Adrienne, and Emilie's going to get set up for our next roundtable to keep on this topic of research. So, Adrienne, I'm coming to you. Thanks, Anastasia. Thanks, Em.
Thank you.
So we talk about habits. So my friend the robot is learning how to brush his tooth now.
Yeah. So it's automatic. It's cued by a context, right? Anastasia talked about you walk into the bathroom, you see the toothbrush in the glass, you see the toothpaste. Yep.
And then you brush with this. So we talk a lot about predicting the probability of people going to the gym. This is exactly what it does. We also talk about the fact that there is obvious benefits of using machine learning, especially the fact that you are not relying on memory. If it comes to my memory,
right?
If it comes to my memory, that's probably good. And we learned that habits forming takes time, which probably explain why I'm still on the couch.
Still on the couch. However, I follow you on Instagram, Adrienne, and I know that you challenge yourself to draw every day. So I guess you kind of trained yourself to be in the habit of sketching every day.
Yeah, that doesn't count as gym. So.
It's not the same as
No.
Well, you can challenge yourself again. Yeah.
Younger people are less predictable than older people. So we have this old lady doing sport, doing jogging, and she was not expecting that kind of hobby for this younger people. I couldn't have myself with that one.
The last one model, yeah.
The last model, right? So he's a cowboy now. And the good old days of the piggy bank, it's still now really harder to form financial habit now that everything is digitized and probably immaterial. Do you want to go back to the other session? Yeah, great. Let's do that. The one just before about improving patient-doctor communication. I love that one. We talk a lot about the challenges of patient-doctor communication, and amount of information can be overwhelming for the patient. The medical jargon can be difficult to understand this.
Decode,
Yeah, and sometimes patients have to wait to get the information.
long?
Maybe, I don't know. I hope not. And providing personal information that is simplified, gamification again. So this time we are gamification.
Could work for hand washing, could work for healthcare.
Yeah, and for medicine as well. That's great. Reducing the administrative burden. Sometimes that can be hard for doctors as well. So or robot is here to help again. And improving trust. If the AI is posing as a doctor, that make us a problem. So he has this doctor mask.
Yeah, Dr. Patel said, right? It's okay as long as we're informing them. As long as I say, this message has been created by AI, however, your primary care doctor or your oncologist has reviewed it as well. Makes people more open or more receptive to AI as opposed to just getting a message that you feel clearly came from our smiling robot.
And we had this great first opening keynote, right? We have this robot trailblazing, blazing really the path, opening new avenues for research, exploring new ways, really, to democratize science. I think that was great by lowering the costs.
Even John said to Eric's question, right? Even maybe for smaller firms, Gen AI might be the way into bigger research, better research, when they might not have the budgets, the timeline, the data sets. Yep.
Especially when it comes to enhancing replicability. So we know he's a magician. He can do everything. But it's not, Gen AI is not a substitute for human ingenuity, even when it tries, right? So we have this cave woman painting on the wall, and he's trying to mimic it, but maybe that's not the same, right? And finally, that partnership between private organization and academia, everyone bringing something to the table.
Right? John's recommendation to say, reach out, whether you're, research providers like BVA or a private enterprise, reach out, that there are academics. I think he used the term chomping at the bit to get access to data. And from Anastasia's case, we just saw that too, right? Getting access to, I assume, a private healthcare system, getting access to 24-hour fitness and having those data sets. Those don't grow in a petri dish at a university. They need access to do their experiments on actual data sets coming from the real world. Thanks, Adrienne.
Thank you, Ted.
So we are moving along, still on the topic of research. I'm going to pass it over to Emilie. You're going to meet our colleague Estelle and meet one of our partners, Samuel. So Emilie, over to you.
Merci Ted. Alors on va switcher et cette roundtable va se faire en français.
So this roundtable is actually going to
Donc
be
on a
in
appris beaucoup de
French.
choses.
We learned a lot of things today. I hope you've been tuned in since this morning, or possibly since yesterday morning. We've had great speakers, academic. We've learned a great deal. We shared a lot. We talked about insights, customer insights this morning with Stefan, with Renault, with Orange. We've looked at the impact of AI and a number of things that have been experimented by the companies we saw this morning. We're going to continue our discussion around insights. After Anastasia on habit formation, we're going to come back to insights and seek to understand how AI has an impact. We've been doing this at the BVA family and with customers as well. It's really a trend. We've done a lot of experimentation, a number of pilots, and we're right now implementing actual solutions. And this roundtable brings together two of our colleagues / partners, Estelle, Cavallaro, who's with the BVA family, product and Samuel Cohen, our partner on synthetic data. We'll come back to that in a moment. So the objective of this roundtable is to understand understand what we are developing, what solutions are being developed by the BVA family and by our customers. Estelle, over to you. So you're head of product at the BVA family. You've been in research for many years, many years. You're still very young, but many years. And you're absolutely passionate about it. So you were into research, now into product development for the BVA family. Tell us about what you do and what are you doing with AI insights? Well, as you all know, data is essential, absolutely key when it comes to decision making for our customers, for customer experience. But before making decisions, there's lots of questions.
Comment peut-on expliquer ce taux de détracteurs?
How can you explain so many detractors? How can I increase this by 10 points? What actions should I undertake to do this or such a thing? And what will be the results? What will be the outcomes? So, to answer all these questions, we do this. We dig and we make assumptions. We have limited resources, so we make assumptions. We're going to... Data will give us some interesting insights, but are we really digging in the right place? Are we digging where the most insightful information can be found? We don't know. So, with all that in mind, we tried to develop a new solution that will actually increase our ability to detect all the information that's hidden in this vast amount of data to make well-informed decisions. Let me give you an example. Data generated. You have data with all kinds of variables. You could take data from surveys or from CRM. You don't sometimes even know where to start. All you have is assumptions, so you need to remove the deterministic biases to explore all the data. So we generate a data cube. So you have a target, which is customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction is something fairly simple to understand. What you want is better customer satisfaction. To understand, and to do this, you need to understand customer satisfaction and dissatisfaction. You take all the data, you look at all the combinations, and it gives you this data cube. This data cube is really precious because it will allow you to identify the most impactful information and break it down to subpopulations, subgroups. We talk a lot about adaptation, personalization, customizing. Every individual is unique. Here we can really dig down and look into the nitty-gritty. And this is where AI plays an important role. Whether in retail, insurance, in the banking industry, you need to be able to explain why you're finding such unexpected results, atypical results in these subgroups or at the individual level. And then you can start working on actionable items, actionable variables. So this is where you can actually improve customer satisfaction. So we take the data cube, once again, what you do is that you're going to apply
l'ensemble des actions optimales que l'on peut faire pour
augmenter actions possible to, for example, increase customer satisfaction.
On va avoir des actions personnalisées sur
here again, you, for each profile, for each subgroup or sub-profile, you can apply personalized actions. So instead of having a vast mass of data, you have actionable individual data. So you're going to be able to action, to send an actionable message to a specific subgroup or subpopulation, sometimes a very small group, a very small sample of individuals. Now, if you take this one step further, even, by doing these little steps, individual actions, you're going to, you can obtain very personalized actions on very small samples, and this gives you a cocktail effect. The cocktail effect is, if you do this many, many times, you're going to make a difference for a large population with individual actions. So we use data to actually do storytelling. So it's no longer based on assumptions. It's based on actual data and on observed data. Now, if you take it even one step further, one more step further, we have so much data, customer data, but we find it very difficult to leverage this data, to use it. So we would like to build a knowledge database that we can tap into, a knowledge database. Could be qualitative interviews, focus groups, surveys, quantitative research, with questions, databases, reports that are generated, recommendations made by experts. All this has a lot of value. Questionnaires, and what I told you right before is those data cubes that are very precise, very accurate. All this can be placed into this larger knowledge database. All that data will then be consumed by an LLM. So we then have a prompt library. Prompt libraries are developed by experts. It takes real experts to develop good prompts. So what we do is that we rebuild simplified thinking of a person who does the analysis, if this person had all the data readily available. So we're going to write the prompts based on that, and with that in mind, we can then use a chatbot, for example, ChatGPT, on that database, which it's super powerful, high-quality data, calibrated, verified, very factual data, to allow you to make strategic decisions. And last but not least, consuming all this data takes experts. We have data experts, but it can be very overwhelming. And de restitution de cette base de données, de cette what is important is to communicate either through reports, videos, podcasts. How are you going to disseminate the information and the findings? Technology goes extremely fast, and who knows, maybe a year from now, we will have new solutions to mine the data and present the findings. Well, we're going to have another presentation after this on how to report on findings, how to report the findings. This is so exciting, so exciting. I guess this has been an ongoing process. You've been working on for a year now with your team? And is this something that is easy to deploy? Is it accepted? Because I know that the insight industry has gone through a lot of change. Sometimes change is painful, sometimes it's easier. What's been your experience? As far as deployment is concerned, we started to test these things, and they really proved to be very valuable. And my job is to now scale this and apply this at larger scales. And this is something we're doing as we're speaking. We're really deploying this right now. And
sur le sujet de tout ce qui était prise en main,
c'est un vrai sujet,
mais je pense qu'on en a parlé plusieurs fois dans les séances précédentes.
Learning how to use and how to do this.
On aide nos collaborateurs à utiliser
training our employees to become familiar with the solution. And we talked about explainability, about hallucinations. It's important to for people to understand what they can trust, what they can't trust. What things they have to pay attention to. The training, employee training is essential. Guiding them, showing them the way is important. And as I said before, we have experts, very seasoned experts. And we are giving them even more solutions so they can take their level of expertise even further and really dig very deep into the data.
On aide vraiment nos clients, les managers.
So we help our customers, we help our managers
d'attendre ou de tester des
create
choses.
their own
Là, ils construisent
journey,
petit à petit, peut-être avec
build
des petits
their
pas,
own
mais
journey.
vraiment dans un objectif,
Sometimes, but with little building blocks. It's a slow process, but eventually we want them to reach their goals, such as, once again, improve customer satisfaction. Estelle, thank you so much. This is very interesting, very exciting. Let me now turn to Samuel. Samuel Cohen. Sorry, we're losing the sound. The sound is back. You specialize in something we've discussed several times since this morning, for good and bad reasons, synthetic data. Okay, we've talked about synthetic data several times in earlier roundtables. Sam is a well-known leader in the field of AI, applied AI, that is, applied to insights. Before you created Fairgen, you're working for Meta AI, and you hold a PhD in AI and an MA from Oxford. We're going to talk about scientific data, about your company, Fairgen, and I'd like you to tell us what's possible. I'd like you to be very pragmatic, very concrete. What can we do with all the things we've discussed so far? And don't hesitate to go into the nitty-gritty. You've been working on this for much longer than we have. First, tell us a little bit about your background, tell us about Fairgen, and then go for it. Tell us about synthetic data. Well, thanks, Emilie. Thanks for the introduction. So, yes, I've been working in synthetic data for 7 years. I've worked pretty much on all applications, potential applications in text, image, insights, surveys. And my objective has always been to enrich data with other data generated by a model. And in the world of insights, when you can go further, when you can enrich your data with additional data, enriched by a model, by data coming from a model which was built upon the same data. So you're not creating new data from scratch. It's generated by a model which feeds on the existing data. So we call them synthetic respondents. So we did a survey. You do a survey, 1,000 people. It's the cloud dot on the right. And there is one segment, that's the dots towards the bottom, on which we'd like to zoom in. For example, 40 or 50. So we're going to train a model on all the data. All the 1,000 data points. And the model is going to learn correlations between the individuals. And it's going to generate more respondents for one specific segment. So it's not a model that was trained on millions and millions and millions. You've already done the survey, and now you want to go further by learning more about an existing survey. So we were able to prove scientifically that for these small segments, we can multiply by 3 the size of a survey. So you could increase, you could multiply by 3, and you don't need to reach out to more people. So what does that mean for the customer? So these are statistics. On the brand's side, it allows you to do a lot niche marketing. A lot of niche marketing. You have a brain tracker, you track engagement on different brands or products. So you can actually make very granular recommendations at a much smaller scale, at a brand level or a product level, because with very specific samples. So the second benefit is that no need to go back again and conduct a new survey or a new study for the audience you're targeting. So you actually zoom in almost real time. It takes on average 30 minutes to get those insights. Interesting. Estelle, this is fabulous. This is very complimentary. You mentioned the cube. And yes, Estelle can find the targets. We can zoom on them. And the budget is very friendly.
ça va amener beaucoup d'avantages au business.
That's for the
on peut
brands. For
compléter les quotas,
researchers,
donc les clients sont contents. On peut avoir un avantage du côté IA, c'est-à-dire on peut dire, regardez, nous, vous avez des technologies qui permettent d'aller beaucoup plus loin
AI, we can go
le marché.
much
Donc,
further
en fait, tout le
than
monde y gagne
what the others
dans ce
do.
marché.
It's really a win-win deal for
Maintenant, la
everyone.
grande question, c'est
And
comment ça
the
marche.
bottom line question is, how does it work?
BVA l'a
We have a
rappelé
platform.
dans tous ses services.
BVA has included this in all its services. It's in all the workflows.
On ne voit même pas Fairgen quand on utilise notre BVA Pixel AI. C'est une plateforme, on upload un sondage,
you upload a survey,
on entraîne un modèle,
you train
on sélectionne
the
un segment
model,
qu'on veut booster,
you select
et
one
ensuite,
segment you would like
un
to
nouveau
boost,
fichier,
and it gives you
de répondants.
a new file, a new sample of
Et
respondents.
ensuite, le dernier
Very
point
simple.
que je vais évoquer, c'est
Last but not
qu'on y
least,
croit ou qu'on n'y croit
whether
pas.
you believe it
Il y a des
or
manières
not.
quantitatives,
There are
statistiques, de
quantitative,
vérifier que cette
statistical
technologie marche.
ways that
C'est
things
le
that
concept du parallel
verify
test.
that this is true.
D'ailleurs, ce qui a été
It's
fait pour
called
prouver que les
parallel
méthodes de
testing.
collection en ligne
It's
de
the
sondage
same
fonctionnaient.
the same system that is used to verify online
C'est-à-dire qu'on
testing.
peut prendre
You take
cette étude dont je parlais plus tôt,
the sample
on
I
peut
mentioned
ensuite
earlier.
prendre,
You take a
entraîner un modèle
subsample, so you
sur un
train a model
sous-échantillon
on a subsample.
de cette étude-là, qu'on va booster ensuite
You
des
then
différents segments.
boost
Et on va
this
comparer
subsample,
justement donc ce boost
and then
à
you
les données qu'on a
compare
gardées de
this
côté pour pouvoir
to
montrer qu'on est
separate
capable
data to actually show
d'affiner la
that
précision
it
de
works.
ces modèles. Donc on est capable de dire voilà,
So
ça marche. C'est pas une question de
we can
philosophie,
prove
c'est
that
une
it works.
question de
It's
maths,
not
de statistiques.
philosophical,
On peut
it's
vérifier que cette
mathematical,
technologie marche.
statistical,
Voilà, c'est
it's
à peu près tout ce que je
proven.
voulais.
That's all I wanted to add. Okay, I know it works, but a bit like with Estelle earlier, I asked her the same question. It can be a bit scary, right? A lot of people say, yeah, I'm not sure, does it really work? It looks like a magic trick. It's real fast. It allows us to significantly boost our samples. How does it really work with customers? This is becoming quite popular. How does it really work?
Alors, c'est très simple.
Well, it's very straightforward, really. On a monthly
L'intérêt des
basis,
clients et des marques
the
augmente,
customers and
parce
the
que demain, c'est un
companies
sujet
express
dans lequel tout le monde
an
parle.
increasing interest, really,
Le
because
deux,
everybody
la
is
valeur
talking
est
about
claire.
this.
C'est-à-dire
And the
si ça
value is
marche,
pretty clear. Look, if it
oublions est-ce que
works,
ça marche.
well,
Si ça marche,
leave it to one
la
side
valeur
possibly,
est
but
claire et elle est
I mean, if it does
monnayable.
work,
C'est une
then
valeur,
you can draw
le
money
ROI
from
est
it.
extrêmement
The
clair.
return on investment is quite
Donc,
clear. So,
d'un côté,
on the one
il y a de
hand,
plus en plus de
you've
bruit,
got,
donc on se dit que peut-être ça marche.
you know, we
De
might
l'autre
think
côté,
it
la
might
valeur,
work.
si ça marche,
Otherwise,
est là.
either side of the question, if
Donc
it
les
does
marques
work, it's
sont de
great.
plus en
And so
plus
the
dans
brands,
dans
if
un
you
état
will,
d'esprit de, ok,
the
il
mindset
faut qu'on
is such
essaye.
that, right, we need to
Au
try
pire,
this out, because
on va en
worst
faire un
case,
test.
we'd have done a
Et dans le
test.
meilleur des cas, ça
And
peut
in the
changer la
best,
manière dont on
in an
on
ideal
travaille.
world, it
On
can
va
be
pouvoir
a
aller plus
game
loin, on va
changer
pouvoir
for
avoir
us.
des
We can go
études plus
further, we can have
consistantes,
more
plus
consistent,
cohérentes,
more
et on va
coherent
pouvoir zoomer, donc avoir
studies,
des
and we
meilleures
can zoom
décisions
in and
business.
get the best business
Donc, le mindset a
decisions
complètement
out of it. So
changé,
the
ces
mindset
derniers
has
mois.
changed
On a
considerably
Omar à
over the
Athènes,
last few
où justement j'ai pu
months.
observer ça at scale. Avec, voilà, un millier
I remember
de
seeing this,
chercheurs
1,000
et
researchers
de personnes travaillant dans les marques
working with
qui veulent
brands
explorer.
who've
Et
wanted
donc,
to throw
aujourd'hui,
themselves
on
into
vend
their exploration
ces
of this.
des grandes marques
And so the
adoptent
big,
cette technologie.
heavy-hitting brands
Et
are adopting
toutes
this
celles qui l'ont pas encore
technology,
fait
and those who haven't done
veulent
it
au
yet
moins
want
commencer
at
à explorer.
least
Donc,
to
ces
embark
technologies
on
sont
some
vraiment
sort of
prêtes
exploratory
pour le
work. So this really is ready to hit the market. So we hear pretty much everything and anything about synthetic data, and we saw that this morning. Isabelle spoke of it this morning. Some people say, I believe it, others don't. Like anything new, like any innovation, it's the same thing, isn't it? Having said that, is there not a problem of defining terms? What is synthetic data? Because no doubt there's lots of different types. Is everybody saying the same thing? I think it's, the insight market is always a bit, the muddies are a bit, the waters are a bit muddied. How would you clarify the waters? What is synthetic data? Who's doing what? What are we talking about? I think it's important to understand what we're dealing with. Qualitative data, qualitative data. That's a very important point. It's very important to experiment with synthetic data technology and see whether it works or not, and be very specific about what you mean by synthetic data. You're absolutely right. I would make a distinction between two categories. First, models that have been pre-trained with a million surveys, ADLM, for example, and that replicate a real life population without using a real life survey. so personas and what have you. On the other hand, you have more quantitative approaches where you're modeling in one area, you're just going to amplify the size of the sample that was initially collected. So those are two different categories. So for the first category, the advantage is clear. I can pre-train a massive model. Once I've got an idea, I can run a concept test, and this is borne out in the studies, by the way, and you can get some sort of results straight away, because you don't need to go to real-life people. You can just interrogate these artificial people, if you will, and you have an insight, and you can run concept tests. You can have ideas, basically, about how to improve your study before launching your study. That's the advantage, because the drawback is that there'll be biases, because you'll be building your model on studies that have already been run. And the second point is that these studies aren't necessarily connected to the market, because they've been trained on things that are operating outside the market. So if we have trackers in industries, because you really want to track what's going on over time in a market, but this is not true of these models. So this solution is good for drumming up fresh ideas, but it's not good as a substitute for the real-life world. And then more statistical models, such as those that we use, they use the grassroots, and then they do a premium regression work in order to improve the robustness, the resilience, if you will, of our study. And then you've got safeguards. You've got ways empirically to check how far you can go, and you can have clear guidelines about when it works and when it doesn't. So those are the limits, if you like, of that particular category. You need to be careful. You need to follow these guidelines scrupulously, set up by groups such as ours, empirical guidelines about samples, what's going on the ground, questionnaire formats, so you don't run into problems with this statistics. All right, you've talked about time. I think that's really what really matters today. I think algorithms, IA, artificial intelligence rather, is a case in point. And with a cube, you'll take the temperature on one side, and then you'll ultimately take a decision. And the time between the two has been contracted. Talking about, things that just emerge all the time. Things crop up, so you have to be agile, get in there quickly, tweak things to better understand what's going on. So by drawing on AI, this is really something that we can do now, things that we can do now that we couldn't do before. Time savers and what have you. You can make shortcuts. You can feed the machines in data rather than insights more quickly to make, ultimately, good decisions, good recommendations. I would agree. Absolutely. Once we know the limits and the scope of what's possible, then it's a win-win. But if you don't abide by that, well, it's a problem. It's not about reducing the amount of time that you're devoting to the research. You want to think about the usefulness of that time. Recently, I worked in sector leaders, and they said, look, I want to create more value. Rather than stay on a plateau, I want to offer great value to the brand, so you can get the best out of it. That's right. Automation, of course, again, is part of the equation, but drawing value from the entire process, that's what really matters. So I got lots of questions. A question for you, Estelle. The cube is great, they say, but how do you avoid the biases and the blunders, if you will? Can you talk about best practices to help you avoid these pitfalls? All right, then, on the side of things that we use, this cube computation and simulation, what have you, one of the major advantages, obviously it can take you further and more quickly, but beyond that, you can remove actually entirely the deterministic biases. You're doing it with hundreds of variables, with the cross-pollinating. You've got hundreds of thousands of different variables, really. So you're not dealing with a bias that would flow from your sector or the preconceived idea you have over customer. No, you're really being exploratory. I mean, here, talking about hundreds of thousands of people. And so this is such that we can rank these subsets of subpopulations. So you've lost your bias usefully. So then with the AI side, the generative AI side of things, the idea, of course, is the strong point, really. You have to think about the quality of data. And you have to know what you're inputting. Here, this is data that we're working on that comes from us, produced by experts. We've got data scientists, we've got experts in the data field. So you want premium data in there, more commentary than data. And then there's transformation of the data itself. That's also important. To be able to not commit these blunders and to produce something that's mediocre and to construe things badly and therefore twist your recommendations. And then the prompts. This is a huge amount of the work we need to do, and I think the tech world and the experts world intersect. You're talking about AI substituting humans. That will never happen in this field. We'll need an expert to interpret what's going on. What do we want to find? What terms are we going to use? Because our jargon may be rather atypical depending on the sector. All that has to be properly defined to help AI help us extract these insights to avoid bias and hallucination. That's right. It's advantageous AI, indeed. Here's a question which crops up regularly with synthetic data, and no doubt you'll know it backwards, but here it is again. What about line duplication and consumer profiles? Yeah, this is the idea that when you do a weighting, let's say, I don't know, you've got one segment, and you're supposed to have 50 people. Well, you might end up with only 25 people. So what we do is we'll weight a double weighting for each individual, as if we've got, two people for the price of one twin for a real person, if you like. And this will correct this bias, which stems from the fact that we've undersampled that segment. Now, if you zoom in on the segment, on the 50 people who in actual fact is 25, the margin for error for that group is not 50 people, because you've doubled them up, haven't you? So you've only got 25 people in that array within that group. So you've corrected a bias globally, but you've still got the same variance and the same error margin within the segment. In other words, you can't zoom in down granularly if you've only got 25 people and not 50. So what happens in the world of these synthetic models? Earlier on, if you remember, I said that we have a booster effect of 3 times or threefold on average with these thousands of tests. And what I mean by that is that you'll generate a segment that has been boosted, that has the same statistical error margin for error as if we had offered a sample threefold. So when we zoom in on that segment, you're going to have 75 people rather than 25 people. Yeah? So this means that you can fulfill the quotas. It also means you can zoom in with a desirable room for error, margin for error. So basically, this is how it works. And so from a synthetic perspective, you've really got a proper premium weighting, really, because you're reaching the same level had you had 50 instead of 25 in the first place. Right, that's crystal clear. Another question, lots of questions. Here's one in Globlish. That'll be all right. The model, how can it be accurate for small segments, whereas samples where it's been trained on is so small? Well, we've seen in the slides, haven't we, that schematic where we had that cloud plot with a little segment at the bottom that you wanted to boost. The idea here is that you not only have the 25-person sample to be boosted up to 75. No, you take the 1,000 people, which offers a correlation to understand the people who are involved in the questionnaire and then enrich it. So there are two patterns that we use. One, which are questions,
représente le tableau de cette étude.
If you remember
Au niveau des questions et au niveau des individus.
the table for my
Au niveau des
study,
questions,
and
on va
then
prendre des patterns du style,
individuals. So
voilà,
you can
en général,
have
si tu vas
a question patterns will be, I don't know, in every
en
week.
général, tu vas donner un score plutôt positif en termes de satisfaction à Zara. Donc ça, c'est des
will
patterns
you
que le modèle
give
va pouvoir
some
utiliser.
sort of
Un autre type
satisfaction
de pattern, c'est un pattern au niveau
level?
individuel.
Other
Le modèle
words,
va apprendre
in
que
other words,
les
it would be
4 ans,
individuals
répondent de manière plutôt
in an
similaire
age
aux
bracket
24-35 ans et
where you'll see a similarity
aux 70+.
in
Donc, basé
response.
sur toutes ces patterns,
So you've got
il va
all these
pouvoir
patterns,
crafter
and with
un
that, you're going to be able to put together
enrichi
an
avec une marge plus
enriched
faible sur le segment qui
sample
intéresse,
with
basé
a
sur tout ce qu'il a
lower
appris. Donc, c'est
error,
pas
a margin
25
for error.
75 personnes.
So
On
you've
apprend
got,
de
I mean,
1000
if you've
personnes
got 1,000
pour pouvoir
people,
prendre ces 25 et les augmenter, les enrichir.
and then you have, it's like as if you have the 25 earlier on that in my example, then I enriched.
How do you know
it's not just a correlation if you're not using a hypothesis as your starting postulate? Can I read it? Here, I can probably.
Si tu poses pas des hypothèses au début, comment est-ce que tu sais que c'est pas
How do you know, if you don't have a hypothesis as a starting point, how do you know it's accurate at the end of the day? Well, the cube, such as it's defined, draws on powerful algorithms, mathematical, etc., statistical, that are validated once again by our experts. We're going to do calculations that will help us properly understand the case satisfaction within the sample and how it relates to others. You're going to see my limits in statistical knowledge. My colleagues would be delighted to answer. But you've got a number of indicators that help us to see whether this is an atypical population, and second, to gauge that extraordinary character. So you immediately need to, you need to prioritize. It's not a correlation point, it's this statistical point, because you see that something's happening here. And then you've got the actionable point. In other words, here, for each subpopulation, you're going to have the optimization calculation to make. The switch, I don't know, you've got this population that consumes offering number 3. We know that they want to consume offering 4. So the new action could be, oh, you're lucky, you're going to be offered option 4, but this will give you 10 additional points for the satisfaction. And so there'll be calculations for each section. But with the high-performance computing, we can generate results through a vast array of combinations on underlying vast ocean of data. The synthetic data, why are they reliable? Okay, let me tell you. If we had 3 more people for a segment, there would be a difference. Now, hang on, what do I mean? The constant that arises is this. Look, I've got 25 people, 18 to 24 age group in the field. This comes back to weighting. Will I have the same insights as if I had 48% yes to question 1? And will I have...
Non. Donc l'idée c'est que la grande trouve, c'est-à-dire si j'avais
I mean, if I had a sample of 100 more people in the real world, let's imagine that 60% is the ultimate answer. So I've got 40% yes, so there's a gap of 15%. The idea here, the result is based on the augmented result, and we're going to get closer to the number if we had a bigger sampling, 57, 58, depending on the underlying grassroots level. So you're correcting the variance, the room for error, and you're going to get closer in all the sortings we'll have done with the augmented sampling. So why are we changing these series? Well, because we've used more data than those 25 people. As I was saying earlier on, do you remember? You might understand that 1924 are closer to a 25-31 age bracket. So you want to reduce the variability in one of the age brackets. And so we take that to correct the results and reduce the margin for error. And so the results, therefore, will be closer to what you would see had we seen many people surveyed. Another question. No, we talked about this with Anastasia. She'd used synthetic data for robustness in her study. What about the world outside the insight world? How is synthetic data used? What's the future for synthetic data for you? Well, of course, the leading field is LMM, or the major groups that are organizing, are dealing with language models. The problem is that they've reached the limits of the subscribers. They've gone across the web and they've reached the ceiling. They haven't got any more data to use to train their models. What are they doing? Well, they create synthetic data, which is specific to the tasks where they want to see a better performance in their models. And then they will retrain the model with those data sets, with these small data sets that are specific to these target areas. So you might have ChatGPT that, I know it's a bad example, but anyway, let's say with that example, I mean, they're bad with making mathematical computations at ChatGPT, or if there's, or you had to extract things from databases, let's say. It's very specific, and you had to enter the model and the language that corresponds. So ChatGPT, create me that, and then once I've got some examples, then you fine-tune ChatGPT to work on its own product, as it were, yeah? So that's one use case, and everybody does that. All the leaders in the field do that. That's the first use case. The second use case is privacy and data personalization. At the end of the day, if you can replicate a database in a pretty good fashion, well then okay, these are synthetic data, these are new individuals of yours, so there's no problem of data privacy, and they're replicating things, and you can replace your data you've got with that data, so you can abide by data protection legislation at the same time. So these are the big use cases that exist today in synthetic data. Great. Just I'm running my eye over the questions. Any more? Hang on a sec. Here's a question which is more generic. What are the challenges that you're currently grappling with in understanding customers and creating segmentations? Behavioral science, how would it deal with that? It's a bit of a tricky question, I think, isn't it? Creating segmentation. I suppose it's for you, is it? Yeah, well, we're not dealing with segmentation per se. We find segments. I don't know, when you're talking about segments, do you mean something else? I don't know. But the question is what, sorry? The biggest challenge on what? On understanding the various customers and doing segmentation. Well, this is what we're saying earlier on. The fact that, I mean, I'll give you an example, a hands-on example for you. Let's just imagine the 24-35 age bracket. They like chocolate. They recently went to a supermarket and they've bought up some chocolate. And we know their level of satisfaction, and they come back, etc., etc. All right. So we've got that subset of population. We've got that data, and so you'll see that we're capturing that information, and we can go all the way. We can drill down to the finer detail. But here you're going to be able to run specific actions, and the challenge that we've got is to be able to personalize in terms of customer experience, personalize what we're going to do, because as soon as you talk about actions, it means money, because you're going to expend money in physical material, training. There needs to be some return on investment. So the fact that you can focus on a tiny segment and to do micro actions but will yield an interesting result, a valuable result, that's a challenge for companies to be able to fine-tune things very quickly, turn things around and customize. I don't know whether that was the answer. Well, that was the question, but that's the answer I give to the question understood. And if it wasn't that, well, you can pipe in the question again and we'll answer possibly differently. Well, thanks very much, Estelle. Thanks to both of you. It was very interesting. I hope everybody enjoyed that roundtable on AI and ICET and insights. Ted, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Emilie, and thank you, Estelle. I have to thank our BVA colleagues, but also thank you to Samuel. Good to have you back here at BVA, Samuel, one of our partners. So, We are still within the research section. We're 2/3 of the way through our research session, but I want to check back in with Adrienne after that last session. Adrienne, where are we at?
Yeah, so we started by saying that there are indeed a lot of questions that can be overwhelming, right? Those big questions. But luckily we have this multi-dimensional cube to explore the data, and Estelle was telling us about finding those jewels, right? And all those
diamonds
data.
in the rough.
The diamonds, yeah, exactly. And hopefully identifying leverageable data, and our robot friend is helping again to push that lever and hopefully have like better satisfaction and everything. I love that cocktail effect. You love cocktail, right, Ted?
I think we need a cocktail. It's been a long day.
Especially if it helps you to have better satisfaction and everything, right? Small actions and great results. Everyone loves that, right? But everyone loves cocktail as well. Yeah. Synthetic data, big topic.
Big topic across a number of sessions. Even, I think when we weren't expecting it, it kept coming up in the questions from the attendees online.
Yeah, and our robot friend is making delivery now. Obviously, he's delivering insight, and he's transforming the insight delivery, niche marketing times to insight. But beware, you must follow the guidelines. This guy is certainly not doing that, but yeah.
So it's not a free-for-all, right? That the utilization of AI doesn't give us kind of license to do whatever we want. We need to make sure that it's really structured, and that we are indeed following those guidelines.
Yeah, it can even help you to follow the regulation, right? So we anonymize data. This is what we saw. We saw that great session, right?
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah,
good to have Estelle here from BVA Data Factory. So, Emilie, as if you didn't do enough, we got you back. So. We're moving along into the final stretch of day 2 here at the Human Advantage. Next up, we have a demo, so a bit different than our other sessions, on a fascinating application of AI. Leading the session is Richard Bordenev. Some of you met him yesterday. Richard is a longtime BVA colleague. Richard has over 20 years of marketing experience, both on the client side, Danone, United Biscuits, and Mondelez, as well as on the agency and consulting side of the fence. Richard actually was a founding member of BVA Nudge Consulting back in 2013 and ran our Asia Pacific Nudge unit until very recently. Richard currently serves as the Chief Behavioral Officer at PRS and Vivo, and Richard's a longtime collaborator of mine. I'm excited for him to show you this next demo with an exciting startup called Nudgyt.
Yes, I did mention it in my previous roundtable. You'll see it's very innovative. Richard will be speaking with Kathleen Yu. So Kathleen is a data scientist and an entrepreneur who is fascinated by the intersection of AI and human talent. She founded her first AI company called Rumor Rocket in 2014, so that's quite a while back, 10 years, while still in university. Rumor Rocket is now a profitable business operating in 4 countries. In 2021, Kathleen launched Nudgyt with the vision of creating AI with human talent working side by side. Nudgyt is a behavioral science and machine learning company, so really right in our topic here at Human Advantage, and focusing on developing behavioral solutions that can sense, think, and act.
So, I hope you're ready. Richard's going to introduce you to Kathleen, and Kathleen's going to introduce you to Sanya. See you there.
Hi, Kathleen. It's very nice to see you today for this Human Advantage AI dedicated day. You guys are running a company called Nudgyt. Maybe you could share with our audience a little bit of what you're doing.
Sure, it's great to be here today. So a little bit about Nudgyt. We started it in 2021 with the mission of using behavioral science and integrating that into AI systems to simplify how data-driven decisions are made. So one of the challenges that we noticed in the industry was there was so much data being processed, but not a lot of insight to work with. So we combined our algorithms with cutting edge AI systems to see how we could simplify that process. And one of the things that we found was when ChatGPT came out in 2022, there was more of a demand for the technology that we were developing. So we pivoted around generative AI, and right now we're building systems and AI experts for various industries.
I can remember in 2022 when we had our conversation, it was all about ChatGPT. At that time, actually, most people were looking at it as a kind of a omniscient chatbot, or maybe some use the term stochastic parrot. But since then, a lot has happened, and I think we are moving into more problem-solving tools or expert conversations. Where do you see AI going now? And then maybe how do you see companies taking over the changes happening?
So, having been in the industry for almost 12 years, working on and building AI, I've seen a lot of hype cycles come and go. And the interesting thing about this current cycle is I feel that it's simultaneously overhyped in all the wrong ways, but also underhyped in all the wrong ways. When ChatGPT first came out, everybody was so impressed with what it could do. And people were saying it was only a matter of time before programmers would be replaced, data scientists would be replaced, and so on. Well, that's not exactly the case. The technology still has a lot of promise. The algorithm underneath large language models simplifies and helps us find patterns from large amounts of data. So in a sense, it's a tool that can be used to engage with the data that we're collecting and to simplify how decisions are made with that data. So what I'm starting to realize is as companies work on their data sets and integrate it with AI systems, a lot of the focus is going to move from managing data to building pipelines to build very useful and actionable insights.
Yeah, we see a lot of automation going on, but there's one shared belief that I know you and I have about how AI can actually create some sort of AI colleagues, like partners or coaches that could not just help us do our work, but maybe also upskill our teams and coach us. Can you explain the type of layers you have to add to the let's say, classical AI to make it happen?
So when I talk about the behavioral science that we at Nudgyt are doing, it's plugging in something called heuristics into AI systems to simplify how an AI can process data in an actionable way. So, for example, when you're talking about experienced marketers, none of them probably go through thousands of pages of market research, but they simplify what they're looking for when going into a new market into 5 questions. What are the top brands in the industry? What jobs to be done are they solving? What underserved jobs to be done are there in the market? And how can they position a product to serve that market? Is that market something that can make a lot of money? And when you ask these simplified 5 questions, you actually formulate a heuristic. It's a lens that you can use to look at the data. So what Nudgyt does is we're looking at scaling these expert heuristics into generative AI systems to simplify that decision-making process. So you're no longer looking at it from a prompt and get a response, but the AI is able to ask you questions to get clarifications on your objectives and to see if it has the data to be able to move your objectives forward.
Well, that's amazing power for an AI assistant. Maybe, Kathleen, you could show us what we've been developing together with Paris in Vivo. Do you have a demo for us?
Sure, Richard. I'd love to introduce you to Sanya. She's an innovation strategist that's been trained on PRS and Vivo's content to help write new innovation concepts and find emerging trends in existing markets. So, Richard, here's Sanya, and Sanya, here's Richard.
Hi, Sanya. Good to meet you. I'm Richard.
Hi, Richard. I'm Sanya, your AI research partner. I'm here to help you launch compelling new product concepts by discovering underserved market segments and opportunities. Let's get started with a few questions. What kind of new product are you writing a concept for?
Well, let's assume I'm an international marketing manager and I want to create a new instant noodle product.
That sounds exciting. Richard, which markets are you targeting to sell your new instant noodle product in?
Oh, I'd like to launch it in Indonesia.
Great choice. Indonesia has a large market for instant noodles.
Now, can you give me what insights or what jobs to be done are underserved in the Indonesian market, for example?
Excellent. Richard, let's dive into the insights. Based on the existing market research, here are a few potential jobs to be done that might be underserved in the Indonesian instant noodle market. Like to explore any of these options further or need additional details on specific segments?
Well, let's pick one, maybe the premium version. Can you elaborate like the different persona that could be interested with this kind of product?
Absolutely. Richard, let's delve into the premium instant noodle segment. Here are a few personas that could be interested in this kind of product. Would you like to explore strategies to effectively reach and engage these personas?
Well, I may be more interested into the busy professionals.
Urban professionals. Demographics. Ages 25 to 45. Living in urban areas with higher disposable income. Needs. Quick, yet high-quality meal solutions that fit their busy lifestyles. They appreciate gourmet flavors and are willing to pay a premium for convenience and taste. Preferences. Unique, sophisticated flavors, organic or sustainably sourced ingredients, and stylish, convenient packaging.
Sanya, tell me, can you spot emerging trends that I could apply?
Absolutely. Based on the existing market research, here are some emerging trends in the Indonesian instant noodles market that you could consider for your product concept. 1. Health-conscious options. There's a growing trend for healthier instant noodle options, such as low-calorie, high-fiber, and MSG-free varieties. Brands like Memonilo and FitMe are capitalizing on this trend. 2. Spicy flavors. Spicy flavors are highly popular among Indonesian consumers. Brands like Lee Gaga Extra Pedas and Lee ABC Sanera Pedas are focusing on this trend. 3. Premium and innovative products. There is a market for premium instant noodles with unique flavors or real ingredients, like bakmi mewah, which includes real chicken meat and mushrooms.
Can you give me ideas of flavors that maybe are not existing in Indonesia, but popular in other Asian markets?
Richard, here are some unique flavors popular in other Asian markets that could appeal to this segment in Indonesia. Laksa, origin, Singapore, Malaysia. Description, a spicy noodle soup with rich coconut milk, shrimp paste, and a blend of aromatic spices and herbs. Beef pho, origin, Vietnam. Description, a fragrant noodle soup with a clear broth, infused with star anise, cinnamon, and cloves. Usually served with thin slices of beef.
I'd like to test your ability to write marketing concepts. So maybe you can try and write me a product concept for instant noodles dedicated to health-conscious consumers. Can you do that?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to help with that. Here's the product concept for instant noodles dedicated to health-conscious consumers. Product concept. Thick noodles, the health-conscious choice. Product name, Thick Noodles. Target audience, health-conscious professionals, fitness enthusiasts, and individuals seeking nutritious meal options. Product description. Thick Noodles is a premium instant noodle brand designed for health-conscious consumers who do not want to compromise on taste, convenience, or nutrition. Our noodles are made from whole grains and enriched with essential vitamins and minerals, ensuring a balanced and nutritious meal in every bite. Key features. 1. Whole grain goodness. Made with 100% whole grain wheat for a higher fiber content and a lower glycemic index. 2. Nutrient enriched. Fortified with vitamins and minerals, including B vitamins, iron, and calcium to support overall health. 3. Low sodium. Contains 30% less sodium compared to regular instant noodles, making it a heart-healthy option. Packaging. Thick noodles come in eco-friendly, biodegradable packaging that is not only good for your health but also for the planet. Each package is designed to be convenient for on-the-go meals, perfect for busy professionals and fitness enthusiasts. Marketing message. Fuel your body right with thick noodles, where nutrition meets convenience.
Amazing. Okay, now, Sanya, could you create a customer persona who would be interested in convenience and on-the-go product, for example?
Sure, I can create a customer persona for you. Let's call her Ayu. Customer persona. Ayu. Demographics. Age. 28 years old. Gender. Female. Location. Jakarta, Indonesia. Marital status. Single. Occupation. Marketing executive. Income level. Middle class. Psychographics. Lifestyle. Busy and fast paced, often juggling multiple responsibilities between work and personal life. Values. Convenience. Efficiency and practicality.
Thank you very much, Sanya. Nice to meet you. Imagine I want to launch a new premium soba noodle, like with buckwheat noodles and rich flavors from the world. Like, would you be interested?
I'm really curious about trying these global flavors because I love exploring new tastes. However, instant noodle with a lot of flavorings might not be the healthiest option. I hope the product uses natural ingredients and avoids too many artificial additives.
Well, that's inspiring. Thank you. Now, apart from the flavor and the healthy part, are there some other aspects of the product that would be important for you to consider purchasing these kind of noodles?
To be honest, I don't have much time for cooking and cleaning. I rather just pick something up from the nearby warung. If they serve the noodles, I would give it a try. It might also be a good midnight snack for when I have to rush for project deadlines.
Wow, that's amazing what an AI assistant can do. Thank you for introducing me to Sanya. Well, as a former marketer, I can tell you, I know where and when I would invite this kind of expert assistant, like in the NPD processes. There are many moments where you need someone to challenge your ideas, to help write. Of course, I will stay in charge because I know the brand, I know the market, but definitely she can help me like fine-tune concepts and make things more consumer-centric. So, and maybe shorten the process because usually this takes a lot of time to write, do and redo. But so thank you very much. That was really insightful, and I'm looking forward to the future. What is the future for you?
Well, thanks for having us, Richard. For me, it's really less about AI that takes over existing jobs, but people augmenting themselves with the power of AI. At the end of the day, there are strengths and weaknesses to this technology. It's not magic as much as we like to feel that it is, but it is a big step forward in how we process data. There's so much data that's being processed every day. Many companies like to call it the new oil. And for me, this type of generative AI is the one that will help us translate large amounts of data into meaningful insights. But of course, we have to work together to get to that future.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. And thank you, Sanya. And see you later. Bye-bye.